everyone can access it. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I think maybe just before we start, you can introduce yourself and what you're doing, because I know I've spoken a lot to you, but everyone else hasn't, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Welcome all to my first interview as a part of my special project where I am trying to get in touch with genetic counselors around the world. My name is Disha Surana. I am from Australia, Sydney. I am an aspiring genetic counselor. I started my interest in genetic counseling in year 2017 when I moved to Australia. And since then, I've been trying to learn more about this field. I've been trying to look at different resources. I've probably done 1,000 seminars and webinars related to genetic counseling. And through this project, I am hoping to reach to the audience out there on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, and other social media accounts who are aspiring genetic counselors as me. And I'm hoping that this experience will give them an idea of how genetic counseling is around the globe. And it will also give them insights into how varied and how different the field is. Okay, now I would just start, I would like to start with a brief introduction of each one of you. So I know that to the audience, you are from South Africa and from Johannesburg. Now, if each one of you could just maybe give us a quick introduction to yourself, that would be great.
Okay, so yes, you're right. We're in South Africa. We are in Johannesburg, and we are all part of a unit that is based or is affiliated with the University of the Witwatersrand, which is a university here in Johannesburg, but also affiliated to the National Health Laboratory Service in South Africa. So my name is Monica Aruja. I am a very newly qualified genetic counselor. I started off my studying career doing a Bachelor of Science degree, where I majored in genetics and physiology. And then I did, and that was 3 years, I did an honors degree in human genetics and then did my master's in genetic counseling. I will go into a bit more detail about the master's degree a bit later on, but basically Barry and Bianca, who will introduce themselves now, have also gone through a very similar process. Merlin's got a little bit of a different story, so she'll explain.
Yeah,
but maybe
definitely.
Bianca, you can go.
Okay,
so,
thank you, Monica.
My name is Bianca Kazus. I qualified as a genetic counselor and a registered genetic counselor last year. So just a bit of my training background. I did my Bachelor of Science majoring in human physiology, genetics and psychology at the University of Pretoria. And then after that, I came to Wits University and did my honours in human genetics. And then I followed with my master's in genetic counselling. So yeah, that has been my sort of training background. So also quite newly qualified with just more than a year of experience. But yeah, I'm really enjoying the position here.
Yeah, thank you, Bianca.
Barry?
Okay, yeah, thank you. So my name is Barry. So in terms of my educational background, I studied a Bachelor of Science in Medical Sciences, which is a 4-year degree that's equivalent to an honors. So in my 4th year of study, I majored in human genetics. So I did this at the University of Limpopo. So in 2018, I started my master's in genetic counseling at Wits University, and then I completed that in December of 2019. So currently I am 8 months into my post-degree internship, and I hope to become qualified very soon. But Monica will take you through the stages of like becoming a registered genetic counselor in our country.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Barry.
Okay, so yes, as Monica said, I'm from a very different background. My name is Merlin Glass. I did nursing and midwifery and pediatric nursing. And my interest in genetics came really then because a lot of the kids in my wards had genetic conditions like cystic fibrosis, hemophilia, Fanconi anemia. So I worked with genetic cases for years and years and years anyway. in my pediatric training. I then got a post as a genetic nurse long before the master's degree had started in genetic counselling here in Johannesburg. That was in 1990, was the first course in genetic counselling. So already up to that stage, I'd been working as a genetic counsellor in the various areas around, in and around Johannesburg, seeing patients with all sorts of conditions. We had very few clinicians. So I ran my own clinics, made my own diagnoses, did all my own testing. So it's very different from how things are today. And at the time, what's been amazing for me is, 30 years ago, I had these concepts in my head that one day we're going to know exactly what causes the conditions that we didn't know. So we knew about Queensrÿche and Down syndrome and all those very definite chromosome abnormalities and syndromes. But so it was astounding for me watching the development of the genetic testing and how exactly what I thought would happen happened, that eventually every single condition has been found and the genes have been found. So it's really been amazing and astounding for me that it kind of unraveled in the way that I thought it would, but there's so much catching up to do. So so that's really my background. So I've been working as a genetic counselor since 1987, long before you were all born. So I've seen a huge shift, not only in the training of our wonderful young genetic counselors, but certainly in the management, treatment, testing of patients with conditions that we weren't able to test for before.
Fantastic. I mean, that is just marvelous. And it's so amazing to know that you were in this profession, in this field, even before it probably had given the name of genetic counseling. And I'm sure the amount of knowledge that you get and the amount of insights that you get into the field is very helpful. And it also gives us a background of where it actually started from and where it is today. And like you said, that you probably had once thought that, these syndromes or these chromosomal disorders would one day have a name. I think now we as young generation are somewhere in the same boat where we've already started to imagine what could be the future of genetic counseling, or we probably have vague or wild imaginations in our head that someday this one is definitely going to happen. Thank you, Merlin, again for your introduction, and thank you, everyone. Now let's just start off with getting to know a bit more about genetic counseling in South Africa, and as to what is the prerequisites or the requirements and the process to becoming a genetic counselor.
Okay, so I'll start off by saying that genetic counselling is still a relatively new field in South Africa, and at the moment there are about 27 registered practicing genetic counsellors across this country. So we are a small group, and some of us work solely within the state healthcare system. Others work completely in private, and then there's others that work in both. And a lot of our department is, genetic counsellors that work in both. Okay. So in order to become a genetic counsellor in South Africa, you have to have met qualifications and done all the requirements to register with the Health Professionals Council of South Africa in order to practice. So this means that you need to have obtained a master's degree in genetic counselling, as well as completed a 2-year internship. So in most cases, the first year of the internship is actually run concurrently with the second year of the master's degree. So you only end up doing one post-degree internship year. Yeah. And then in terms of applying, it is advantageous that applicants have done an honours degree in genetics. But as you've heard even from our group, that individuals with a Bachelor of Science honours in another type of life science or an honours in psychology, and applicants with a nursing background are also considered. But what happens there is that applicants that don't have any genetics background would need to write an entrance exam and pass that exam with 65% or more in order to be offered an interview into the course.
That's interesting. That's so interesting, because I think from what I've gathered to know, that most of the countries like the US, here in Australia as well, it's kind of a compulsion to have bachelor's first year degree in genetics. And if you don't have that, a lot of applicants actually lose the opportunity to apply that year for the course.
Wow.
They have to have that experience in genetics. And if not, they need to have extensive amount of volunteering experience along with, you know, a basic level of genetics. So it's good to know that you guys actually have an examination as an entrance to the course for the ones who do not have a background in genetics. So I think that really stands out. Yeah.
And in our country, we have two locations or two different universities that offer masters in genetic counseling. So I can't really speak for the other, but for us, our course, as it spans 2 years, we do take students only every second year, so every cycle, and we take a maximum of 4 students at a time. And one of the prerequisites that we have for applying for the course is that applicants need to have made contact with us beforehand. So come in, talk to us, meet with the course coordinator, and it really is a good opportunity for applicants to speak to our current students and interns and try and get a better understanding of what the course is like and you know, what the expectations are. And obviously the other recommendation would be that for applicants to really try and get some sort of counseling exposure. So like you've said, the volunteering or getting involved, we also make that recommendation. So doing a basic counseling skills course, you know, something like that, so that they have a really good understanding of what,
Okay, makes sense. Definitely. And I think out of my personal experience, I do think volunteering does kind of give the applicant more insight into what counseling could really look like. And it definitely makes them understand if they really want to choose genetic counseling as a career or not. So yeah, I completely see the suitability of having a volunteering or a counseling experience. Well, thank you, Monica. And now,
sorry, I was just going to say that what I can do is I can give you a link to the website with all our training information. So our course coordinator, her name is Dr. Shelley McCauley, and she runs the master's course here. And then what I'll do is I'll give you a link to the WITS website that has all the information. So if people want to look at it, they can.
Definitely. I think that will be really helpful. And I can definitely include that link on my blog, where I will be posting the interview and more about your university and about the course in South Africa as well. So I can definitely put that information out there, which can be helpful to the applicants.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. I would like to know, maybe this could be for Barry, I'm not sure, but I know he's already explained of how and what he's done before coming to genetic counseling. So I just want to know, what were the specific requirements that he or she met for getting into the genetic counseling course? And also attached to that is what field of GC or genetic counseling you work in, and what do you do in specific as a genetic counselor?
So Bianca will talk a little bit more about what the field looks like for us. But I think for all of us, we pretty much, you needed to have done well. It's obviously competitive. So there's many people that apply, and as long as you meet those basic requirements of either having written the entrance exam and passed, or you've got a background in genetics, you meet the requirements to apply. And then what happens is all the applications would come into the department, and they would make they follow their own selection process in order to shortlist candidates for interviews. Candidates then come in and are interviewed for the positions. And I know in our department, it's normally a 2-day interview process where they do a couple of different things. They do, you know, like one-on-one or like a panel interview, but they also do some exercise-based kind of
Interesting.
interactions.
Okay.
And then from there they make their decision, but they take into account a lot of different factors. And the interview panel is not just genetic counselors. It's genetic counselors, medical geneticists, people with, you know, psychology background. So it's well informed, and they really do invest a lot of time into choosing people that they think are appropriate candidates.
Okay, so I think from what I understand is that in the interview that you said is 2-day, expanded over 2 days, you do a more of case scenarios or things like genetic case scenarios as well, or role play.
Yeah, Bianca was interviewed. I didn't study, I didn't do my master's here. I actually did mine in Cape Town. And so my interview process was a little bit different, but Bianca can explain her experience of doing it here.
Yeah, so I can just elaborate and add. So just in terms of the minimum requirements when you apply to the course, so a Wits University requirement is that you have to have gotten at least a minimum of 65% for your honours degree before you're even allowed to apply. But as Monica already mentioned, I mean, the course is quite competitive. So just by getting a 65% average does not guarantee you an interview spot. But that is a minimum requirement. And also for the individuals who are coming in without having genetics as their major and have to write the genetics entrance exam, you also have to pass that test with a minimum of 65% before you can be considered for an interview. So just from a academic marks point of view, 65% is sort of the ballpark, but again, that doesn't guarantee you a spot. And then you were just asking, you want some more information about the actual interview process. It is quite an intense interview. I don't think ever in my life have I been through such an intense process, but it's also quite important. I mean, you see afterwards why it's so important that the interview process is as intense as it is. So if I remember correctly, the first day of interviews, it was a whole panel of people from the department. So a range of genetic counselors, medical geneticists, some of the medical scientists in the labs, the head of department from the genetics unit. And you basically have, it's just you and this panel, and they drill you with lots of intense questions. And I suppose the purpose of that is to kind of make sure are your interests aligned and your expectations of what a career as a genetic counselor entails sort of, you know, aligned with your expectations. And so it's a lot of personal questions to see if you are suitable and a suitable candidate for the course and the career. And then day 2, we got split up into small groups. I want to say groups of about 3 to 4 individuals. And we had to watch videos of like simulated genetic counseling cases and then answer questions about how we felt the genetic counselor handled the case, things that we noticed, things we picked up from the patient. So it was just like a general discussion after watching the videos. And then there was also a clinical psychologist on the interview panel, and she actually did role plays with us. So we got a scenario that had absolutely nothing to do with genetics and genetic counseling, but she made one of us the patient and one of us the counselor, and we just had to work with a scenario and sort of demonstrate some basic counseling skills and communication skills in a role play. And so, so I think based on your day 1 interview and all the group exercises the next day, then the panel made a decision and select the students from there. So that's how the application process works.
Very interesting. I don't think I've ever heard about a two-day interview for genetic counseling. So it definitely looks very competitive and not so easy to crack. So yeah, thank you so much for the detailed information about the interview. I think it really is very helpful to know how exactly, you need to be prepared for the interview. Thank you, Bianca. Now I would like to know as to, in South Africa, when you work as a genetic counselor, is it uniquely specified as pediatric, or cancer specialist or, you know, a specific field of genetic counseling, or do you work as a genetic counselor, probably covering all those areas?
Okay, so here in our department, and I think in most of the departments in South Africa, we all work as clinical genetic counselors. So our posts are clinical posts, and we don't specialize. So we are what you would call general genetic counselors. So we see a range of prenatal, pediatric, adult cases.
Yeah.
So we're not limited in that way. We all see a range of cases. And my understanding is it's exactly the same in the other centers in the country as well.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, interesting. I think that's again a good kind of big difference compared to the other Western countries like Australia, US, Singapore, where the genetic counselors kind of start working in a specialized field. But I know for a fact that even India, back in India, it's pretty much the same as South Africa, where you're not specialized to work in a particular area of genetic counseling, but you actually, you know, kind of cover all the areas and all, you kind of meet all the kind of patients in a particular day. Thank you, Bianca, for that information. Now, I was quite curious to kind of know if you can elaborate, if one of you can elaborate on one of your most difficult or unique case that you had to deal with in terms of the patient you visited, if you kind of realized there were any knowledge gaps when you visited the patient, and how did you handle the challenging situation?
Okay, so I'll take this one. I think that, you know, firstly, Barry will elaborate further on the language barriers, but I think a lot of difficulty that we encounter are the language barriers. And the way we deal with it is, obviously it's much easier to counsel the patient. I do a lot of drawing and in my explanation to the patient. But if we're really stuck and Barry happens to be at the clinic with us, or one of our other clinicians who speaks a few of the 11 languages of our country, then we can call them in to help with translation, which is not ideal because you kind of lose your connection with the patient. And often when you have a translator in the room, the patient then turns to the translator for kind of reassurance and for discussion, whatever. So that for me is always very challenging, is when we have to work through a translator, because you're not really sure also. You know, my language in Zulu and Tswana, I get it, but I don't speak fluently, and I certainly don't understand everything.
Yeah.
Sorry, someone's phone's going off. So I find it very challenging when we have a language barrier, because I'm not sure, you know, the patient will answer me, but will never really share with me the deep emotional stuff that she's possibly sharing with the translator, or that she would have shared with me had I been able to connect with her on the same language level. So one specific case, well, not one, but a couple of cases, is in South Africa. You know, we work mainly like in the state with our Black South African patients. And unfortunately, we don't have the mutations for all the conditions that have been tested for in like the European community. So a common condition that we see in white patients and Black patients is spinal muscular atrophy. I'm not sure how familiar, Disha, you are with all the conditions, but spinal muscular atrophy, the type 1, is very severe, and the babies present at birth and usually die within the first year. So they're intelligent, they are bright little buttons, so sweet, but they have absolutely no physical movement, breathing difficulties, swallowing difficulties, and eventually they die. And only about 50% of our families with spinal muscular atrophy have a known mutation. The other 50%, am I right in those percentages, Monica, Bianca? It's around 50% that we know the mutation, but in the other 50% we don't. So when we've had a family, we've had a baby with a confirmed diagnosis of SMA, clinically, we can't always get a diagnosis from a genetic perspective. You know, we don't find the mutation. So it's very hard and very sad for us that we then can't offer them prenatal testing for a future pregnancy. You know, the prenatal testing, I think somebody else is actually going to cover that in more detail, but it's also very challenging because people have a huge amount of their own beliefs, you know, that what God has given them, that's what they'll have, that's what they'll deal with. But once they've been through a scenario where they have a baby that dies, they often shift in their processes and think They can't go through this again. They can't let a baby go through this again. So having been adamant that they would never do prenatal testing and they would never do a termination, they often shift in their decisions because they've now had a lived experience with a baby who's had a very severe condition. So that for me is really sad and very challenging when we cannot offer them conclusive testing in a pregnancy. And then again, as I've mentioned, the language challenges for me are huge. You know, we all learned as young South Africans in schools to speak Afrikaans, which you probably heard about in English, and I speak another language as well, but we were never taught as young children to speak African languages. So thankfully this has shifted, and all the kids in all the primary schools now are learning African languages and then are much more confident to chat.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we're very grateful to Barry, who he'll explain to you himself, where he can really assist us a lot with regards to language issues.
Okay. So just to, Merlin, just to add to that example that you gave, that, you know, a lot of times you have patients who, because of having a traumatic experience in their first instance, decide not to go with, you know, a second chance, or they carry that experience and that trauma throughout their life. Now, when you meet patients like these, how is the patient and counselor relation in South Africa? So in terms of what I'm trying to find out is, do you stay in contact with them after their first experience? And do you help them, or how do you help them to get out of that experience that they've had?
All right, so one important thing we know is that we are not psychologists and we're not social workers. But one of the skills that genetic counselors are provided with and learn are the techniques of listening, supporting, guiding, and intense counseling experience, so that you can support them from a psychosocial point of view. But I think every single one of us realizes our limitations, and where need be, we refer to the parent support groups as well as to psychologists at times as well, where we find that the case is actually out of our depth with regards to counseling. You know, also the younger counselors now are seeing it for themselves, but I have patients who still contact me after like 10, 12, 15 years, where I've led them through a really difficult experience. They then have a positive experience, and they've still kept contact with me over all these years. And I think the younger counselors are beginning to see this themselves, where they've had a patient who's had a terrible experience, and now they've either had a normal pregnancy with a normal baby, or they've, you know, chosen a different path. But you definitely get long-term and ongoing relationships with your patients. I was chatting to Monica earlier, as how, you know, that we may see thousands of them, but because they've seen one of us, they hold on to how we've made them feel and make them feel like important, and that we've really concentrated on their issue and dealt with them individually.
Yeah, interesting. It's interesting to know how you're supposed to draw that thin border between how much you can do and how much you can't, but you also still maintain that valuable relation with your patients pretty much forever, till the time they have that next experience. Thank you, Merlin. Thank you so much for that insight. Now, I would like to know more about your job sort of workload, in terms of how much percentage of your day-to-day job goes in seeing a patient. What percentage do you get to spend on actually learning and, you know, developing your knowledge and skills? Because I know genetic counseling is also all about being up to date with whatever current goes on. And how much time do you actually get to study on a particular patient's case?
Bianca, you're on mute.
Thanks. So instead of answering that question on a day-to-day, because on a day-to-day basis, our days could look completely different, I'll answer sort of like overall how much we spend our time doing different things. But I would say about 50% of our time involves seeing patients in clinic and doing patient-related tasks. So that would include preparing for the case before the time, writing patient reports and summaries after you've seen the patient, coordinating testing, delivering genetic test results. So that probably takes half of our job is patient related. And in terms of preparing for those cases, I mean, to be honest, in our state system, some of those cases might arrive on the spot. And so you are preparing 10 minutes before you've seen them. And I think that's not unique to genetic counselling. I think that is the same in any clinical service that is provided. You can get that. But for the most part, we will have an idea of the cases that we are seeing, sort of like at least a week to a couple of days before the time. In our state clinics for our state patients, we would sort of just have basic information such as the patient's name, their date of birth, and what condition they're being referred for. And so if it's a condition you're unfamiliar with, you do have a couple of days that you can go and prepare for that case. Things that we won't have in advance is things like their complete medical records that we will only have access to when we are actually seeing the patient in clinic. So that you just need to give yourself a little bit of time before you call your patient in to just work through their hospital file and look at all their medical records so that you can get all the information. For those of us who are involved in seeing private patients, that information we will usually have at least a week before the consultation date. We will have all their family history information, medical records, previous testing records. So we'll have quite a lot of information. We'll know exactly why they're coming in, have the referring doctor's report. And so there we have quite a lot of information and we're able to do sort of risk assessments long in advance before we see the patient. So there you have a lot of time. So that's sort of our clinical role. Included in that, I would add to that 50%, I'm also quite heavily involved from a lab perspective in doing microarray analysis and reporting. So sometimes it feels like it's 100% of my time, but it's not. I'd include it in that 50% patient load where we're doing analysis and writing reports. And then sort of the other half of our time, because we are linked to Wits University, which is an academic institution, we spend the other half of our time doing research and being involved in lots of different research projects, whether it's your own research project that you're driving or the supervision of other students during their research projects, and also then the teaching and training. So we are involved in a lot of teaching. So we teach the MSc Genetic Counselling course. We're involved in teaching the Human Genetics Honours students. We are also involved in teaching the medical students at Wits and also some of the undergrad molecular genetics students. So
wow, that's
there's a heavy academic load as well. So yeah.
I just wanted to add that the Masters in Genetic Counselling, I'm not sure if it's entirely the same elsewhere, but our Masters in Genetic Counselling is a coursework Masters. That means that they get academic exposure. They also get, in their second year, have to do a research project. But they also have a practical component from their first year. So they're in clinics with us, seeing patients, observing consultations, getting a real hands-on approach. And as the students train, they are being examined on different goals of the genetic counselling consultation. So we spend a lot of time also supervising students, not only academically, but practically in clinic.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Monica. I think now I would like to kind of understand, because every country has their own issues and challenges that they face in genetic counseling, it being a very sensitive field, but it also has a lot of, I think, contradictions to what should be and what should not be. So I would like to understand as to what are the challenges in genetic counseling in South Africa. Do people really know enough about genetic counseling? Do you get enough patients, or how exactly is the current status of genetic counseling?
Okay, I think I will take this one. Okay, so I think for me, overall genetic counseling is a challenging, but I think a rewarding journey as well. So my current challenges now as a trainee during this pandemic is that we have had to stop some of our genetic counseling clinics, and then we have resorted to doing telephonic consultations with our patient. So this then means that I've got less physical interaction with patients. And also I'm one person who I enjoy doing a lot of like community engagements and outreaches, just going into the community, being with the community, educating them and raising awareness around genetics. That's what I love doing. But given the lockdown regulations and the pandemic, this means that I can't do that right now. And again, we are a developing country, so most of the patients that we cater for, they come from a poor socioeconomic background, and in terms of their education as well, it's quite low. So like you asked about, are they aware of genetic counseling? I don't really think they are. So, and also them coming from a poor socioeconomic background, sometimes it means that they do not have like means of accessing our genetic services. Say maybe they don't have finances to cover their transport to our clinics, so they don't come to the clinic, so we don't see them. But I think for me, the most, satisfying thing about my role as a genetic counselor is that I'm able to be there for my patients, and then I'm able to listen to them, being with them in that moment and explaining complex genetic terms to them. Because like I said, like we see some of them, like they come from different education backgrounds. So we deal with that as we see them in clinics. And then I'm able to explain complex terms to them in an understandable manner. I think for me, that's the most satisfying role about being a genetic counselor.
Okay. Thank you, Barry. It's so interesting to know that you find real interest and satisfaction in raising awareness and spreading the knowledge about this field across your country. And like you said, it's a developing country. And I would assume pretty much every part of Asia, it is a similar scenario where you don't really get patients, upfront. You have to spread the knowledge. I also think a lot of them might not even know what a chromosome is or what a mutation is, or they might not even understand why I have cancer. Like my grandmother had cancer, but I have it. Is there even a link between it? I guess most of them do not even understand this factor that it runs in your genes and that your genes is everything. It's the main part of your body. So I really, I think I find it very fascinating that we as youth can always utilize this as an opportunity to spread awareness among the world, and especially to the parts and to the people who do not know anything about science. And that's also one very beautiful thing about genetic counseling, that it kind of converts all this complex scientific knowledge into simple language which people can understand. And that's how it is helping improve the healthcare industry around. Thank you once again for your insights into that. Now, I would like to kind of know, we've spoken so much about how genetic counseling is about patient interaction. It's about letting everyone know about mutations, about keeping a barrier and, keeping your borders. So I kind of want to understand, what do you think are the key skills in genetic counseling as per your experience, and as to why you would say they are the key skills?
Okay, so I firstly just want to comment on Barry's previous comment. I think it really is important that we perhaps amplify the fact that in general, South Africans have a low genetic literacy. And the fact that we are such few genetic counselors in such a massive population of people stands to reason why we aren't really well known or understood for the role that we do.
Yes.
And like you said, people are not necessarily going to step forward and say, yes, I need genetic counseling.
Yeah.
And that's really why community engagement and being able to reach out to South Africans is really important for us going forward. But in our healthcare system, we do have a lot of support in that seeing patients relies almost solely on referrals from other departments. So we've really developed good relationships with pediatric neurologists and dietitians and physiotherapists and the doctors that work in the Huntington disease clinic, and all of those, we've had to establish professional relationships where those doctors who do have a better understanding of the role that we play can then refer their patients into the system. So
Yeah.
I would say that in private, there might be a few self-referrals, but within the state healthcare system, we rely on other people being referred in. And, you know, as Barry said, there's a lot of confounding variables. And we noticed that especially with the pandemic was that we did try and shift to telehealth. And we were very successful in a lot of cases, but a lot of our patients don't have data to sit on a Zoom call. So we've had to do telephonic consultations, which is a little bit more challenging. Or, you know, they don't necessarily have great signal where they can stay on a call for too long. Or, you know, so we've had to deal with a lot of that, but ultimately we ended up going back into clinic for a lot of it.
Yeah.
And to answer your next question was, I actually wanted to share that I read a post the other day from another genetic counselor who said that she was really proud to be part of a profession who gets in the trenches with people and loves them there. And I thought that was really profound. And, you know, for me, I would say that genetic counselors have to be people that are empathic, obviously, but also very self-aware.
Yeah.
And I would say that we are good listeners and good communicators. And we definitely are lifelong learners. We have to always be up to date with information. You never want to do a disservice to your patients by providing out of date or inaccurate information.
Yeah.
And I would say that, you know, over and above all of this is that we are patient advocates. So we are there to support our patients, to be there for them, to help them understand something that may not necessarily be easy for them to get.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. So it all sounds like to be a genetic counselor, you have to be probably a person who is a people's person, who loves to be among people and who's very good at collaboration, because it seems to be like it is a very collaborative role where you have to communicate and be in contact from doctors, surgeons, oncologists, hospitals, private clinics, and a lot of other specialty members to be able to serve your patient. And it also definitely, to me, seems like a role where you want to keep learning. Like you don't want a monotonous role. You want a role where you are always up on your toes, learning something new. Because definitely in genetic counseling, that is, I think, something which is never constant. Every day we come to know about different rare diseases and genetic disorders. So it's all about being able to be aware of everything that is going on in genetics. Thank you, Monica. I think one other question, which obviously comes from a lot of aspects that we've already spoken about, is a topic that I've seen has been a center of debate quite recently. And a lot of genetic counselors from around the world have been talking about how non-directiveness should be a must or should not be a must, or should be based on, you know, case-to-case scenario. So I'd like to understand how non-directiveness is important, how important it is in South Africa. Also because the patients that come in South Africa, I would assume, like Merlin said, they come from different backgrounds and different languages. I think you told me that officially there are around 11 languages in South Africa, if I'm not wrong. So I would assume it's very hard to maintain that concept of non-directiveness. So I'd just like to understand more on how important it is. Do you have to maintain it? And is it a must, or is it situation basis?
I think that non-directiveness will always be a guiding principle, you know, so the language distribution in South Africa is not as, I wouldn't say that we have all 11 languages in one place at one time. And the majority of people can speak about 2 of them. So the language distribution also depends on where in South Africa you are. But you're right in that it's always a barrier and we always encounter it. And we do use translators or colleagues that can speak a language. And that's why it's so beneficial to have colleagues like Barry who can communicate. But regarding the non-directiveness, I do realize that we can never really be 100% non-directive, in the sense that by choosing what content we choose to give our patients, that in itself is directive in a sense. But non-directiveness is something that we will always strive for in our genetic counselling consultations, and it's something that we still teach as a guiding principle to our master's students. Yeah. So yes, it is important to be culturally competent and respectful of the differences in the way that people do things, but as genetic counsellors, we always work towards providing all the necessary information to our patients in order to allow them to make decisions that are truly informed about their personal health and the health of their family. So we are there to support them and guide them regardless of what their decision at the end may be. So it is important that they feel safe and supported no matter what they choose, and that is the whole principle of non-directiveness. So that for us, even, you know, despite the language barriers and the cultural differences, it's something that we maintain going forward.
Yeah. Okay. So if I was to, let's say, give an example of a patient who has been diagnosed through the genetic testing of having a hereditary cancer, and obviously the family is at the risk of maybe, you know, having or carrying the cancer, or the offsprings of the patient is at the risk of carrying the cancer. Now, the concept of informed consent also comes into picture. So in this scenario, how would you deal with the patient in terms of advising them of the risk that it would have to the family, and that they need to get the genetic testing done? And do you do like an informed consent?
Okay, so I'll comment my bit, and I'm sure everyone else can also pitch in and say what they need to do. So, I mean, testing is done, no testing is done in our department without consent, and all patients sign consent forms. So that they would have had comprehensive counselling before if they've been seen by us, and they would have done their testing and signed consent. So prior to them testing, they would be aware that there would be a risk for their family members. It's not something that's often a big surprise for any of them. And I would say that we do have challenging cases where there are patients that don't want to tell their family or whatever the case is. But I would say that for the majority of cases that we see, a lot of patients test with their families in mind. So they will test knowing that the result will have an impact on their relatives. So once they have a result, we help facilitate that communication process, and we would talk to them about the importance of informing family members. We would never go above their head and do it for them, and we would never force them to do anything. But we do try and get the message across how important it is that their family members are aware of their risks. And then what we do often offer to do is either, you know, help them with how they can, so talk to them and guide them through how they could explain it to their families. But we also write family, like cascade letters, where they can then pass on to their family members saying that because of this person's result, they are at an increased risk of developing a certain condition. And if they would like more information, they must contact us, and we would help facilitate their testing. So it's not like anything is done without, like, where it's a big surprise at the end. They would know about the testing. I don't know if anyone wants to say anything else.
I think, Monica, you've covered it completely. You know, that's exactly that they get an informed consent. They have to sign informed consent. And sometimes it's quite challenging. You know, I think, Barry, you saw this case with me, where a woman has spinal cerebellar ataxia type 7, and she's got 2 adult sons, but she just did not want to burden them with the information because they were taking care of her. So it was really hard for us non-directively to explain how important it is that her sons get examined and her sons get tested. She eventually got it, and I think that she will eventually encourage them to have testing, but we can't force anybody to come and have testing. We also, Barry and I saw a case together where the baby's got a 4p minus, a Wolf-Hirschhorn syndrome, and they're 2 unaffected sisters who may be carriers of the same mutation that the mother has got. They're too little, well, they're not so little, but they're too young to be tested now. But we have to explain the importance of the implications to her of her daughters having children with the same condition. So we have to, as you say, address each case individually, but we do it in the most kind of non-directive way as we can, and encourage them to have their family members tested.
Okay. Thank you,
Bianca
Merlin.
wanted to say something, I think.
No, I think you and Monica have summed it up nicely. I suppose then all I'll add is that's why, you know, I know exactly about this debate you're speaking about non-directiveness and its place in genetic counselling. And lots of people have published their opinions on it. And it's one of those grey areas where I don't think you can say who's right and who's wrong, and maybe the correct thing to do is somewhere in between. But I think something that's quite important to us, and we were all trained that way and continue to train the new group of counsellors coming in, is that at the end of the day, it's the patient's choice, and you've got to respect their autonomy to make their own decisions. And I think we need to be okay that if our patient does not want to get tested for hereditary breast and ovarian cancer syndrome, for example, despite her personal history and the extensive family history, then that's okay. I mean, I think if you've given all the information and your patient understands the risks and, you know, they've been able to make an informed decision, you've got to step back and you've got to respect that decision. And you've just got to trust that that patient knows and has the ability to make the best decision for them. And if the best decision for them is not to test, then you've done your job.
Yeah. Okay.
So.
Thank you, Bianca. I think all of this kind of resonates to me to an article that I was reading about history of genetic counseling, where I came through how Sheldon and Kessler had termed genetic counseling to be a field about not like a doctor and a patient, but more of a relation of a counselor and patient / client, because I think they were trying to kind of bring ahead the importance of the fact that you don't need to treat them as a patient. It's not a doctor relation where you need to tell them that, no, you have to get the surgery done or you have to get this testing done, but it's about more about a profession, more about a field where you're like Monica said, you're an advocate and you're a counselor and you are just guiding them through this technical and complex knowledge about their body. So yeah, it's quite interesting to know how you would, you know, get the concept of non-directiveness and still be able to communicate the important information to the ones that you're seeing. I guess that pretty much summarizes most of these, you know, questions that we as students usually get in our mind when we think about genetic counseling. And I think one last bit that that I wanted to touch on, which has been anyways pretty much covered, but I guess Merlin said Barry would speak about it a bit more in detail, was about language as a barrier in South Africa. And if you have any specific example of where you dealt with a patient who was from a different language, and if you used any particular type of maybe a tool or a technique to describe them the process.
Okay, thank you. I think as mentioned that in our country, we've got 11 official spoken languages, and then 9 of those are what we refer to as indigenous African languages. So I think I'm fortunate in that I'm fluent in 4 of these languages. So let's say I'm in a clinic and then there's a patient that has got limited English proficiency. From these 4 language backgrounds, it means that I'm able to have a genetic counseling session in a language that they can understand. And as Melon mentioned earlier, I am the only genetic counselor in the team who can at least speak one of these African languages. So usually, and majority of our patients, they are Black South African patients, so speaking these indigenous languages. So often I'm called, often the team relies on me to come and assist in instances where there's a patient that can only speak an African language. So this is definitely the challenge that we face. So I think I'm fortunate in that sense. So you asked about like a specific example. Just to briefly say, as part of my research, I was trying to focus on, because there are no African languages that exist for genetic terms. So part of my research was trying to get the patients to think about language or words, descriptive words in their own home languages that they can use to explain some of these complex genetic terms. They say they're talking to a family member or someone from the community. So what they did, they received genetic counseling, extensive genetic counseling first, and then I saw them post genetic counseling, and then they suggested some of these words. So I remember at this one instance, it was a mom who came to our clinic, and then she had a baby with Down syndrome. So, and then because now I had the data from my research, I was able to use some of those suggested terms or words with the patient. And then I think we reached an understanding. But usually what I would do if I've got a patient with limited English proficiency, I just try to avoid using like too much medical jargon, and then just try to explain things and use analogies like maybe like genetics being a recipe for making a baby. And then if there's a genetic condition, it means there's probably a mistake, something wrong with the genetic information. And that's how the genetic condition came about. So that's one particular example. I think with that being said, and I will end with this, I would like to end with this quote by Nelson Mandela, which says that if you talk to a man in a language that he understands, that goes to his head. But if you talk to him in his own language, that goes to his heart. So I am just glad to have the opportunity to be there for patients and converse with them in a language that they can understand.
Yeah, that is so well said, Barry. Thank you so much. That last words that you said, it just sums up even what I have so far learned about genetic counseling, that it's not about knowing the language that the patient speaks, but it is more about being able to communicate just the important bit of information to them in a way that they understand, maybe even in simpler terms. Like you said, they might know what a mutation is or a genetic condition is, but just maybe trying to tell them that there is something wrong, something that is not normal with them, and that they need to get it tested, or that they need to work on it, is more than enough to let them realize that, yeah, there's something that they need to do. Thank you so much again, Barry and Monica and Merlin and Bianca. All of you guys have very much emphasized on the fact of how language can actually not be seen as a barrier, but maybe as an advantage of how you can, think creative and be innovative in the way you deal with your patients. And also about how this entire field of genetic counseling is all about the human touch. I think we have a course, yes, to professionally certify and make everyone be able to be on the same page and standardize things. But yes, I think something that I've learned from today's interview is that it's more about that human contact and human touch, and being able to be on the same page as your as your patient.
I know, Merlin, what did you want to say?
I just wanted to add something on to what Barry was actually saying, is that, again, referring back to a patient that I saw, and she completely understood everything I said. And we had a whole long discussion, and we explained that was what was going on with the baby. But for her to express herself emotionally, I was not able to go to the clinic, and Barry took over the case. And because Barry was speaking to her in her language, she was able to express emotionally, and it was quite an intense, difficult case. that she may not have shared with me because I was speaking to her in English, but she shared a whole in-depth emotion with Barry because he was relating to her in her own language. So that for me was very powerful and very helpful. And in fact, makes me feel a little bit, well, not a little bit, quite a lot limited, and how restricted I am in communicating, even though I feel like I've done a good enough job. The depth of emotion that gets expressed when you're speaking the same language is a completely different level to when you're speaking, another language.
Yeah.
So we're very grateful to Barry for our language helper.
And I think it also highlights the importance. So Barry's not our only African-speaking colleague. We do have a few others.
Yeah.
And they're actually, we have one first-year genetic counseling student who also speaks African languages. And then we have three medical genetics staff that also do. But it does highlight the importance of diversifying our staff complement as well. Having people that can really help everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Barry, and all of you again. I guess that's it from me. I'm not sure if any of you have anything to ask me or anything to say.
Well, thank you for including us.
Oh, thank you. It means a lot to me. I am not even a student yet, and this opportunity does mean a lot to me. And I'm sure whoever's going to listen to this interview is going to gain a lot of exposure through everything that you've shared. And yeah, thank you once again, all of you. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
Pleasure.
Bianca, did you want to say anything?
Oh no, I just wanted to say thanks for including all of us. Thanks for having us, and good luck as you pursue a career in genetic counseling. I think the profession will be very lucky and very happy to have somebody as passionate about the field as you are joining.
Thank you so much. That means a lot.
I want to ask if we can all take a photo. I'm going to screenshot the screen. So put on your best smiles.
You didn't put makeup on this morning.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Okay. Hold on a second. Yeah, it is quite dark.
I don't know if that's better.
Hold on. I need to start again. Okay. It's because it like freezes the pane. So don't blink, don't do anything. Let's smile. And I got it. Perfect.
Okay, great. Yay, woohoo. I'm done with my
Thank you so much. Well, good luck with the rest as well. And we look forward to seeing them. And it's been so lovely. Like, I'm really grateful for social media and Zoom and everything that's been able to connect us from so far away. So good luck again. We're all rooting for you, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.